Hello, this is a review video to help you as you are studying for your Chapter 8 test, which is due in a few days. So once you're finished with this test, then you will have completed the content and the intermediate algebra course, and you will start studying for the final exam, which is going to happen in week 8. We're now almost in week 7. So one thing I'm going to do for you is to open up all of your assignments in the past so that you can start reviewing on them and improving your scores, which will also help you get ready for the final exam. Now let's start reviewing for test 8 in chapter 8. So first of all, problem number 1 says to solve the equation by using the square root property. What that means is you need to get x squared by itself. So to do that, I will add 5 to both sides, and then I'll get that. Now x squared is not by itself, so I need to divide by 6 on both sides. Now x squared is by itself. So the square root property says that if x squared equals something, that x equals positive or negative the square root of the something. So since x squared equals something, it equals 5/6, that means that x equals positive or negative square root of 5/6. And then we'll rationalize the denominator by multiplying it by the square root of 6. And then we'll get equals plus or minus the square root of 30 divided by the square root of 6 times the square root of 6 is just equal to 6. Then the way you have to write your answers into the computer is, since there's 2 of them, you have to write them separately. So first you have negative square root of 30 over 6, then you put a comma, and I think it helps if you type a space after the comma, but you don't have to, I don't think. And then type a square root of 30 over 6. And so those 2 answers are your answers to problem number 1 on this review. And your test question will be similar to that. Now let's go to problem 2. Problem 2 says x minus 1 squared equals 14. So we have the square of something equal to something. So that means if we apply the square root property, we'll take the square root of both sides. On the left side, we'll just get the inside. But on the right side, we'll get positive and negative square root of 14. That positive and negative happens because the square represents 2 solutions. When the square goes away, you have to have both of those solutions on the other side. So after the square and the square root are gone, then the other side needs to have a plus and a minus sign. Now when I'm going to do this, I'm going to move this negative 1 over to that side. So x will equal positive 1 plus or minus the square root of 14. Once again, I need to separate those answers from each other. So the answer is either 1 plus the square root of 14, comma, or 1 minus the square root of 14. Then let me go to problem 3. So this is similar. X minus 16 squared equals negative 64. So I'm going to apply the square root property. So the square root of x squared minus 16 squared is just x minus 16 equals positive or negative square root of negative 64. And remember, you learned that the square root of a negative is the same as the square root of a positive, except you have to have an I after it. And then before we do that, let's move this negative 16 over. So we'll get x equals positive 16 plus or minus the square root of negative 64. And the square root of 64 is 8. So that means the square root of negative 64 will be 8i. And there's 2 answers, so we need to write them separately. So it's either 16 plus 8i or 16 minus 8i. Those are the 2 answers. Then problem 4. Problem 4 says you have a 15-foot ladder leaning against a building. So you have a building right here, and there's a 15-foot ladder leaning against it. And the base of the ladder is 5 feet away from the building. And you have to figure out how high the ladder is touching. So how high, or H for short, how high is the ladder touching on the building? How high up on the building? Well, we're going to use a famous formula called Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So we know A is 5 feet, that's the shortest side, so 5 squared. We know B is H, so it's H squared. And then C squared, we know C is 15. So 5 squared plus H squared equals 15 squared. Then simplify it, so 25 plus H squared equals 225. Now subtract 25 from both sides. H squared equals 200. Now use the square root property. You'll get the square root of the left side is just H, but then you have to do a positive and a negative square root of the right side. And then you need to break down this 200 as much as possible. Well, 200 is really equal to 100 times 2. So break the square root of 200 to be the square root of 100 times the square root of 2. But the square root of 100 is just 10. So it equals plus or minus 10 square root of 2. Now we know that the height is positive, so the negative answer could happen sometimes mathematically, like if you're on an airplane flying upside down or something like that. But in terms of a building, though, buildings we're assuming are going to go up, not down. So we're going to change the plus or minus to just be plus. So H equals 10 square root of 2. That's the exact answer. Now it also wants an answer that's approximate. So what you'll do is you'll go to your calculator and do 10 times the square root of 2. So then you'll get an approximate answer for the second part of this question. And when you have an approximate answer, you symbolize that with the wavy equal sign. So H is approximately 14.1. And that's rounded to the nearest tenth. Now, let's go to problem 5. So problem 5 says x squared plus 12x plus 2. We need to find the discriminant of this. The discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. So that would be b. So what's b and a and all that? Well, put a 1 in the front of the beginning. So a equals 1. And of course, b is 12 and c is 2. So b squared would be 12 squared minus 4a would be 1. C would be 2. So b squared minus 4ac is 144 minus 8, which is equal to 136. So that's the answer to the first part of the problem. Now remember, if the discriminant is positive, then that means there's 2 real solutions, or two real solutions. Now the question is, though, is that number that's, can we do the square root of that or not? 2 real, is it going to be rational or irrational? Well, we cannot actually do the square root of 136, so it's irrational. So there's 2 real irrational solutions. So 2 and irrational, those are the answers that they're looking for. Because when the discriminant is positive, but you can't take the square root of it, then it's 2 irrational solutions, 2 real irrational solutions. Now let's find number 6. 3x squared plus x plus 5 equals 0. So the discriminant, once again, is b squared minus 4ac, and a equals 3. B, there's a 1 in front of that x, an invisible 1. So b equals 1 and c equals 5. So b squared would be 5 squared minus 4. A would be 3 and c would be, oh, I put the wrong number in for b, sorry. B is 1, of course. So it'd be 1 squared minus 4 times A times C is 5. So I got the C and the B mixed up. So C is 5. So it'd be 1 squared is 1 minus 4 times 3, that's 12. 1 minus 12 times 5 is 60. So 1 minus 60 equals negative 59. Now, if the discriminant is negative, then that means there's two imaginary solutions. So two imaginary solutions. Two imaginary solutions. Now let's try number 7. So 2x squared minus x equals 1. So this problem says solve it by the method of your choice. So 2x squared minus x equals 1. Well, my method of my choice would be to set it equal to 0 first. So I need to move the 1 from the right over to the left. And when you move a term to the other side, it changes signs. So it's going to become negative 1. Then I'm going to multiply a times c together, 2 times negative 1. Like I showed you a couple tests ago. We'll get negative 2. Then you break that negative 2 down so it adds up to the number in the middle, which is negative 1. So negative 2 can be negative 2 times positive 1, which adds up to negative 1. Then you put both of those numbers inside the end of the parentheses, so negative 2 and positive 1. And then you put the first term without the square at the beginning of both of the parentheses. So 2x goes in the beginning of both of them. Then you eliminate any common factor like the 2, and then you're finished. So x minus 1 times 2x plus 1. And then we're not quite finished. We're finished factoring, but we still have to find x. So we find x by setting each factor to 0. So x minus 1 equals 0 and 2x plus 1 equals 0. Now add 1 to both sides. You'll get x equals 1. Then subtract 1 from both sides. Divide by 2. You'll get x equals negative 1/2. So the two answers are 1 and comma negative 1/2. Those would be your answers to that problem. Now let's try number 8. So number 8 says x squared plus 4x equals 10. So once again, I'm going to move everything to the left side, or to the same side, which happens to be the left. So x squared plus 4x minus 10 equals 0. Now on this one, I'm going to use the quadratic formula, which is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. So negative b would be, okay, so there's a 1 at the beginning. So a equals 1, b equals 4, c equals 10. So it'd be negative 4 plus or minus square root of 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times 10 all over 2 times 1, which equals negative 4 plus or minus 16 minus 40 all divided by 2, which, let me move over here, which equals negative 4 plus or minus 16 minus 40 would be negative, let's see, negative 24. Wait, no, negative, hold on, did I do something wrong? Yes, I made a mistake. So I plugged in 10 from the original problem. Now, the original problem cannot be used to solve the equation. Do you know why not? Because see that 10, c equals 10 is actually wrong. So you cannot use the c from the original problem because the original problem was not equal to 0. So the true c is actually negative 10. So really c equals negative 10. So that's going to mean that this 10 right here needs to be changed to be negative 10. And this 40 right here is actually going to be positive 40, because negative 10 times negative 4 is positive 40. And then 16 plus 40 is actually 56. And then over 2. Now we can break the 56 down into 14 times 4. So the square root of 56 will break down into the square root of 4 times the square root of 14, and the square root of 4 is equal to 2, so it's 2 square root of 14. Then you can factor out a 2 from the top. So if you factor 2 out of the top, you'll be left with negative 2 plus or minus square root of 14 divided by 2 in the bottom. But when it's factored out, you can cross it out. So the 2 in the bottom goes into the 2 on the top that was factored out and cancels. Now you cannot divide the 2 in the bottom into the 2 that was not factored out. So this 2 right here, that one stays there and it cannot go away because it's not factored out. But the other 2 is gone though. So right now, we get the answer, which is negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 14. And the way that you will type your answer into the computer is negative 2 plus the square root of 14, comma, negative 2 minus the square root of 14. So that's the final answer for that problem. And let's go to number 9. So number 9 says, write a problem whose solution is negative 4, 6. So if a problem has a solution negative 4, 6, that means it represents x equals negative 4 and x equals 6. And that means it represents x plus 4 equals 0. And this equation means it represents x minus 6 equals 0. Then when they're equal to 0, you will multiply them together. So this represents x plus 4 times x minus 6. The two factors together equals 0. And then if you multiply this out, it represents x squared minus 6x plus 4x minus 24 equals 0. And that represents x squared minus 2x minus 24 equals 0. So the whole equation is your answer. So in this problem number 9, you're working backwards from the answer to get the equation that was the equation that gave you the answer. So you're creating the equation for the answer. And then problem 10, it says the answer is 10i and negative 10i. So once again, that represents x equals 10i and x equals negative 10i, which represents x minus 10i equals 0 and x plus 10i equals 0. And that represents x minus 10i times x plus 10i equals 0. If you multiply the first, because this is a difference of squares, so you just do the first and the last, x times x is x squared. Negative 10i times positive 10i is negative 100i squared. But remember, I squared is negative 1. So negative 100 times negative 1 is positive 100. So the equation, that's the answer, is x squared plus 100 equals 0. So there you go. And that's all for the test review for the Chapter 8 test. Good luck to you, and God bless.